In 1947, a mid-20s mother of two named Martha Beck responds to a Lonely Hearts ad in a well-read newspaper. Soon, a man in his early 30s named Raymond Fernandez does the same thing, and they hit the 1940s equivalent of swiping right and matching. And in 1949, the new, young, deeply infatuated couple commit 3 murders together. We'll start here. Martha quickly ships her 2 young children to the Salvation Army in order to devote herself to Raymond without any of what she would call distractions. He sees this as a sign of unconditional love and accepts her into his New York home. Quickly, Martha and Raymond lay down some ground rules. Martha will pose as Raymond's sister to not arouse suspicion, and Raymond will use there being another woman in the house as a way to lure other women into the home for their crimes. The agreement comes with one understanding. Raymond cannot sleep with any of the victims he invites into the home. Martha is an extremely jealous person and will do absolutely everything in her power to ensure that Raymond doesn't consummate any of his intended relationships. This is where 66-year-old widow Janet Faye falls into the story. Janet writes letters to Lonely Hearts Clubs despite warnings from her friends and family. She does this for the same reason many of us sit in the dark crying, drinking Coca-Cola. She's lonely. She has so many friends, and even a very, very good relationship with her stepdaughter Mary, but she sits herself down. She readies her pen, and she writes to the Lonely Hearts Club, and a mid-30s man by the name of Charles Martin answers. I'm not gonna sit here and force myself to find an elaborate way back here to circle around and try and find some way back to where we are right now just to confuse everyone. So surprise, Charles is just Raymond using a fake name, and Raymond writes his way right into her heart, then takes a right turn right into her home. And so he and his sister Martha show up at Janet's store in Albany, and they spend the day together getting to know each other. After a long few days, Raymond, still under the name Charles, proposes to Janet, and his 30-year-old senior refuses to waste any time before saying yes. She clears her bank accounts, hacks her life into her past, and on January 4th, 1949, the trio start their way from Albany to their new apartment in Long Island. When they arrive, they feed themselves and settle into their new life. Raymond falls asleep first. Janet and Martha find themselves alone for once. We're never going to know what words were traded between the two women here. What we will always know is that Janet was finally pushing towards a new life. Her letters are answered, and she's found hope in the responses of her new fiancé. He's a godly man just as she is. He's a businessman with a bright future, and his family in Spain has left him well-traveled. He and his sister are close. Maybe a little too close, but that's not for her to decide. Across from her, Martha's thoughts are starting to flare out of her sun-bright brain. Don't take that one too literally. I just like alliteration. Martha hates how much attention Raymond has devoted to Janet recently. She keeps it inside. Inside where, according to her, she's burning with jealousy and anger. The next part is where a finish line is crossed. I think we all flirt with danger sometimes. I think it is common to say, flirted with someone I shouldn't have, or I jumped off a building once, but it's okay. I was fine, so no big deal. I once accidentally shoplifted batteries for my Game Boy Advance and the cashier didn't care. This is flirting with the taboo of what is right. Legally, morally, rationally. But there is a line to be wary of. It's where other people are hurt. And once that line is crossed, unlike Jesus, it can never be uncrossed. Martha later testified that she blacked out and had no memory of what happened, but I'll tell you what happened. Martha walks in on naked Janet and Raymond sharing a bed together. Janet's arm rests over Raymond's body and Martha explodes. And with a ball-peen hammer, she pickaxes a hole in Janet's head. Then she ties a scarf around her neck to make sure the job is done. Together, Martha and Raymond clean the room up, wrap Janet's lifeless body in towels and bed sheets, and push her into a closet. After all that, they manage to fall asleep. There aren't a lot of things that I will admit to not being able to do. The ones I do admit to are pretty obvious, like I can't swim, I can't look up due to both my neck and probably being a little bit afraid of the future. I can't seem to wrap my head around the way some people think or feel, or rather how they refuse to feel. I don't have it in me to end anyone's life for any reason. Further, I don't have it in me to touch a dead body or hide one. I'm not unhappy with these inabilities, but I am unsure of how my body is to react when faced with others who don't share those same inabilities. The next day, they buy a trunk, probably with the money Janet took from the banks in Albany before they left. They shove her body into that trunk, and they drive it over to Raymond's actual sister's house where they convince her to house it for the time being. I'm unsure if the sister knew of what was in the trunk, but for now, we'll say she didn't. 2 weeks later, they retrieve the trunk and bury it beneath cement. In the time it takes for that cement to dry, Martha and Raymond type letters to Janet's friends and family. Those letters read pretty straightforward, tracing along the lines of, "Hey, I'm doing great. I'm about to get married and we're gonna run off to Florida." But there's a problem. Janet, again, is 66. I'm not sure how many of you have ever had office jobs, but there's always one dude there who's just on the other side of young, whose entire day is spent on Excel, doing things that the rest of us can do by Control-C and Control-Ving very quickly. Janet was no different. She didn't own a typewriter and she didn't know how to type. So, her family, noticing that the letters are typed, decided to call the police, and Martha and Ray flee. The couple land in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Ignoring what they had just done, Ray once again finds someone to fall for him. This time, it's a widow named Delphine Downing, who lives alone raising a 2-year-old girl. Again, he introduces himself as a successful businessman by the name of Charles Martin, but instead of the religious affiliation that name held with Janet, he comes with the love of children. In January of 1949, the relationship between Delphine and Raymond rails forward. Silently, Martha fills with rage when they start sleeping together, and things just seem to move along. I'm gonna just quote the next part from the source material that I have. It starts here. But Delphine's happiness was short-lived. One morning, she entered the bathroom and accidentally observed Charles without his toupee. She was shocked at his baldness and the ugly scar on the top of his head. She accused Fernandez of fraud and deception. Delphine is hurt. Martha's angry, and Raymond honestly probably doesn't care all that much. So Martha hands Delphine some sleeping pills and tells her to relax, that this can all be explained later and that it's really no big deal. And Delphine falls asleep. Here comes a new problem. Remember the 2-year-old that Delphine has? Well, her name is Raynell. Raynell notices that her mother isn't acting normal and, like any 2-year-old, begins to cry. Raymond, again, probably doesn't care. He doesn't listen very well. Martha has been filled with rage for months now and is yet to find an excuse to exercise it until she looks into the eyes of that innocent 2-year-old, grabs the child, and wrings her fingers around her throat. She doesn't die there, but is left with obvious bruises. Martha panics. She knows if Delphine wakes up and sees the marks, she'll call the police, and what her and Raymond do ends there. "Do something, Ray," he says. And so he does. He finds his way into Delphine's bedroom, fishes out a handgun belonging to her dead husband, wraps it in one of her blankets, kisses her head with it, and fires. For 2 days, Raynell continues to cry and refuses to eat. These 2 days are spent burying Delphine's body under cement, and then arguing about what to do with the child. Raymond's stance is firm. Get rid of the child. Martha, here's a woman who abandoned her own 2 children to run away with a man whose sole purpose was to lie, cheat, hurt, and kill. I don't have the authority to call her a victim or an accomplice. I don't. I don't know that I'll ever have the wisdom to do so either. But in this moment, Martha stands before a 2-year-old girl, crying, cheeks puffy, hungry, whose mother was murdered right in front of her. And Martha says, "I can't." But then she does. They fill a small metal tub with water. And Martha holds Raynell under the water long after the bubbles stop. The couple are now too cocky. They don't run immediately. They don't pack. They don't panic. Instead, they go watch a movie. When they do, they pack slowly and a pair of policemen knock on their door. Neighbors called. The final act is fast enough. Neither of them ask for lawyers. Raymond talks himself up and ranks his crimes among those at the top of killers. Together, they sign a 73-page confession. Because there's no death penalty in Michigan, the state agrees to drop the drowning charges so that New York can try them on their first murder. I'm not gonna waste our times with the trial or their attempted defenses. What Martha Beck and Raymond Fernandez did was disgusting. Is disgusting. I'm not supposed to have opinions, right? I'm supposed to take this information, whittle it down to be digestible and informative, and present it. Let you drink it in and let it dissolve into your day, and eventually fade from your memory. But there are so few instances where someone can take another person's life and it falls somewhere justifiable. And none of these make that list. And there is never a time where I can think of where it's okay to hurt a child, let alone force one into death. These people are both disgusting. And on March 8th, 1951, in New York, they're both executed.